my childhood memory of the monster in the woods became the blueprint for my own destruction. The sun was a dying ember behind the jagged silhouette of pines when I first saw him. I was 10 years old, clutching my wooden knight, the one my father had carved from oak, and I was hopelessly lost in the blackwood thicket. The air was thick with a scent of damp pine needles, and something else. Something metallic and sharp that bit at the back of my throat. I stepped into a small clearing where a fire was struggling to stay alive, choked by green wood and wet leaves. Sitting beside it was a man. At least, I think it was a man. He was draped in a coat made of what looked like several different furs, stitched together with rusted wire. His hair was a matted, grayish mane that reached his shoulders, tangled with twigs and dried mud. "You're far from the porch lights, Leo," the man rasped. His voice sounded like two stones grinding together in a deep well. I froze. I didn't run, because despite the filth and the smell of old copper, his eyes were filled with grief so profound it made my own fear feel small. He told me things that night, about a hunger that starts in the heart, about how the woods never let you go once they recognize you. He inspired a strange, dark resolve in me. I promised myself I would never be like him. I would be a hero. I would be the light that pushed back the shadow. That encounter was a spark that defined my life. I spent the next 20 years trying to outrun that memory, only to find that every step I took was toward the very clearing that I was trying to avoid. The transition began on my 30th birthday. It started as a phantom itch behind my ribs, a sensation of something cold and coiled unwinding in my chest. At first, I thought it was the stress of my work as an environmental lawyer, trying to protect the very forest that haunted my dreams. But then, the blackout started. I would wake up in my apartment with dirt under my fingernails and a taste of raw earth in my mouth. I began to notice a change in the light. The sun seemed just too bright, too artificial. Only the deep, suffocating shadows of the blackwood thicket felt honest. I went back to the woods to find answers. I told myself that it was for closure, to prove the monster from my childhood was just a man. But the lore of Blackwood is older than any town. The locals speak of the vessel, a role that the forest demands. The woods are not just trees and soil. They are a living, hungry consciousness that requires a witness for its rot. It chooses a soul, hollows it out, and fills it with the graft. The graft is a slow, agonizing process. I watched, paralyzed with horror, as my body betrayed me. It wasn't just hair growth or sharpening of my teeth. It was an architectural shift. My skin began to take on a texture of wet leather, darkening to a bruised purple. My joints didn't bend. They rearranged themselves with the sound of snapping timber. I remember the day my human eyes failed. The world turned into a tapestry of heat and vibration. I could hear the heartbeat of a deer 3 miles away, and the sound made my stomach cramp with a localized, agonizing gravity. This was the hunger. It wasn't a desire for food. It was a desire to consume the essence of life, to fill the void where my identity used to be. The more I fought, the more the forest punished me. If I tried to walk toward the road, the trees would physically lean in, their branches weaving a wall of thorns. Time became a fluid, treacherous thing. I would sit by a stump of what felt like minutes, only to find that the seasons had changed, and a moss had grown over my boots. I lost my name. I lost my face. I became a collection of scars and instincts. I spent years, decades perhaps, stitching a coat from the things I had killed. A grotesque attempt to feel dressed again. I used rusted wire I found at an abandoned logging camp, the metal biting into my fingers until they bled black. I became the myth I was warned about. I was the shadow that the hunters saw and refused to report. I was the copper smell in the air. I had become the vessel, the guardian of the rot, waiting for the one thing that could relieve me of my duty. My mind is now a fractured mosaic of who I was and what I am. I remember the smell of my mother's perfume, but it was overshadowed by the scent of the hiker I caught last spring. I remember the wooden knight I buried, but I no longer remembered why it mattered. I remember a tragedy draped in fur and wire. The hunger is screaming tonight. It's louder than the wind. I crouch by my dying fire, now gnarled, blackened talons aimlessly poking at the embers. The fire is the only thing that keeps the beast part of me from completely devouring the Leo part. A twig snaps. The sound is like a gunshot. My ears twitch, a movement that is entirely involuntary and predatory. I can hear the frantic, rhythmic thud of a small heart. It's a young heart, unburdened by the rot. I smell the laundry detergent on his shirt. I smell the oak wood of a toy he is clutching. A boy steps into the clearing. He is 10 years old. He looks at me with eyes that are mirrors of my own past. He sees a monster. He sees a beast of filth and copper. He doesn't recognize me. How could he? I am a nightmare, a warped version of the future he hasn't lived yet. The grief hit me with the force of a tidal wave. I want to scream at him to run, to tell him that every choice he makes to be better will only lead back to this clearing. I want to tell him that I am his father, his brother, and his killer. But my jaw was unhinged. My throat is a tunnel of scarred tissue and ancient hunger. The forest leans in, its branches whispering the script that I am forced to follow. The loop is closing. I am the end of this story, and he is the beginning of mine. I look at the boy, my yellowed eyes weeping fluid that might have been tears a century ago. I open my mouth, and the voice that emerges is not mine. It is the voice of the woods, the voice of the monster that once inspired me to be a hero. I say the words that started my own end. You're far from the porch lights, Leo. Hey everyone. If you enjoyed the narration, hit the like, sub to the channel, and leave a comment about what stories you'd like me to narrate. Also, if you are a writer, send me your stories to my email, and maybe you can see them featured on the channel. Have a good night.